at the amount of woo. I thought the gulags was mostly in the Far East. I didn't know there was this much gulags. Oh, wow. That's a lot of gulag. All right. It's time for me to lose a whole bunch of subscribers from this. Why is Russia not rich? So I was watching this video. And I had to. I was like, no, I can't. I have to react to this. Like, I could not believe what I was watching right now. So yeah, I was gonna say for a rainy day, another rainy day has come. All right, let's see how many subscribers I lose from this.
Russia is not a rich country, but it has everything it needs to be a rich country.
It is a rich country, but okay.
Farmland, oil, gas, iron.
The GDP of Russia is like $4 trillion. By the way, that's rich, but okay. Again, like this video is. We're 7 seconds in, but
aluminum and a labor force of 70 million people. So what happened? Why is Russia not rich? Chapter 1. Early Russia, serfdom and the commune. The country of Russia started out here in Eastern Europe. This land was first unified by the Mongols. Slowly over time, the Russians would ally themselves with different Mongol clans in order to gain more land, power and influence. Eventually, the Russians became more powerful than the Mongols, and in 1547, Russia became an independent country under the leadership of Moscow. With the Mongols gone, it became a lot easier for people to move from one part of Russia to another, and this was a problem.
I don't know. I mean, first of all, I get what he means by Russia, but he should say Moscow. Moscow is a city-state, because although, don't get me wrong, like, yes, the Rus people were, they're the same people, whatnot. They did differ. They differ a lot in their principalities. So just saying that, like calling it Russia, that's kind of inaccurate. Really inaccurate. Okay, because Moscow, when conquered Novgorod, Kiev, got ramsacked by the Mongols, but it was still, Kiev was, distinct from Moscow anyways, although Moscow would eventually come to take its place due to the fact that Kyiv became kind of irrelevant after the Mongols came and more or less ransacked the city, and Poland went and took the city afterwards. And then you have like Belarusia, which has its own unique principalities at the same time. But so saying that it's Russian, I get what he's saying, but it's gonna confuse a lot of people.
Because Russia was incredibly big, so if a peasant did not like their lord, they could move to another part of this gigantic country. As a result, a lord could lose their workforce. Without enough workers, the lord can't live off of the taxes they provide. Those taxes paid for the military. And if this happened in a region close to the border of Russia, then you suddenly had a region without the protection of an army. This left Russia vulnerable and the nobility powerless. And so they implemented a new system called serfdom. The way serfdom works is that peasants become serfs. A serf was assigned a plot of land and was forced to work and live.
He doesn't even understand. He just says a peasant becomes a serf, but he doesn't even explain what serfdom is. It's basically indirect slavery.
Live on that land for the rest of their life.
I say indirect slavery because I've had some Russian people come and say that it wasn't slavery, but again, because they like to take the literal definition of slavery, and it says, slavery is when you own someone and they're your property, and serfs weren't owned by people. Now, the reason why I say indirect slavery is because they weren't property, but they were bound to the land which is owned by someone, essentially just making them a slave. So indirect slavery, that's the best way to describe serfdom.
Their children will have to work the land afterwards. A lord could then buy and sell the land in order to buy and sell the serfs.
Exactly. Like, on paper, they weren't slaves, but in practice, it was the same exact system as slavery.
They could force a serf to perform any work the lord demanded, and a serf wasn't even allowed to marry without the lord's permission. In short, serfdom was just another form of slavery.
Yeah,
But this
pretty
system
much.
kept the Russian elites in power. The Russian leader could give more land and serfs to people who served the government, and it allowed the government to move serfs into Siberia in order to colonize the region. But serfdom also kept people poor. A serf did not get to keep the food they produced, so there was no need to ever grow more food than you needed to survive. It's not that they were lazy, it's that they didn't care. It was a problem of motivation. If a peasant works their ass off and the landlord ships a few more crates of produce, they don't see an extra ruble. So where's the motivation? But over the centuries, other countries had abolished serfdom, and their now independent farmers had slowly developed better agricultural techniques and produced more food. Eventually, countries began producing more food than they needed to eat for themselves, and farmers began moving into cities. For most of human history, 99% of people worked on farms, but thanks to innovation, that became 98%. As a result, just reducing the amount of farmers by 1 percentage point meant you had twice the amount of people who could work outside of agriculture, and those people began working as craftspeople in workshops. When steam engines were invented, those workshops were turned into factories. Factories produce a large number of goods, and in order to earn money, those factories produce things everybody wanted to buy, such as steel products or clothing. But in order to actually sell the large amount of goods you are making, you need a large amount of people with money who can afford to buy what you are making. And people in Western Europe had that money because farmers produced enough food they could sell some of it for a profit. But most Russian farmers were not rich enough because they did not innovate, because any profit they did make went usually to their landlord. But there were also people who did not live in serfdom. Those were farmers living in a commune, and the commune was land that was owned by a community, usually a village or a small town. In the
Like, okay, I get what he's saying, but I don't think that serfdom, although yes, it kind of did have a ripple effect, I don't really think serfdom, because again, remember, when Russia was replaced by the Soviet Union for a brief period of time, Russia had like way more chances to to actually like bounce back. But I don't really think serfdom is the real cause of Russia being being poor, really and truly. Hold on a second. I'm gonna give an example of my country in a second because I could draw a parallel here. So let's continue.
these communes, households were granted a piece of land they could work on. The size of that land was determined by the amount of people living in that household. But what if you have more children and your household has more people? Well, then land gets periodically shuffled around between the farmers to make sure everybody had enough land. But if your land might be taken over by someone else in a few years, why would you spend years developing your farmland if it's going to profit somebody else? As a result, even if you were not a serf, you had almost no motivation to start innovation.
Probably the
Yeah, so no, I get where he's coming from, but I mean, my country was literally a settlement colony / slave colony as well. Majority of the people, at first, they weren't slaves. Majority of the people, but over time, the demographic completely changed. Whether they were indentured servitude or just simply black African slaves that were there, both of them, which is classified as just different forms of slavery. Most of the profit went to the British elites, and even now to this day, those same British elites that own slavery down there, they still own property down there. They still do. It's a huge controversial issue actually, because technically you can't really get rid of their land because, well, that will cause an international diplomatic incident. But even now, despite the fact that most of the people didn't benefit from the work that they were doing from slavery, It was like literally just a few rich elite people, whether it was white or black, because the free people of color did exist and they had their own slaves too. A lot of people tend to forget about that. It wasn't just about racism, it was just about if you have money to own slaves. The point is that no, today we're a high income country and we have a reputation of being quite a wealthy nation, and we're doing quite well off. Despite the fact that for like 200 years, I think, literally like a bit over 200 years, since Barbados was colonized, slavery was a thing. So yeah, I don't. I mean, first of all, no, Russia isn't even poor, and second of all, even if it was poor, I wouldn't really blame serfdom for it, because again, Russia had plenty of time to bounce back from serfdom. Really and truly. All right, geography. Bad geography. Now I have a lot to say about this one, so let's.
Chapter 2. Imperial Russia. Bad geography. If there aren't enough customers inside your own country, you can find customers in other countries. Today, a lot of poorer nations start their development by selling to richer nations. But for Russia, this was almost impossible. To understand why, let's look at this map. This is a map of Russia's navigable rivers, meaning these were the rivers they could use to transport cargo on. As you can see, this river system ends up in 4 locations. First is up here in the Arctic Ocean. This part of the world used to be frozen for long periods of time before human-made climate change. As a result, you can only use this trade route a couple of months per year. The second is at St. Petersburg, but this region also freezes over most of the year, meaning that once again you could only use it for a couple of months. The third is down here in the Caspian Sea, and the Caspian Sea does not connect to the rest of the world. And lastly is this one here, in a place called Rostov-on-Don. You might remember it from the failed coup attempt in June 2023. But this region wasn't colonized by Russia until the late 18th century, and rivers in Siberia did not at all connect to the main population centers in European Russia. As a result, for most of Russian history, the country did not have reliable access to the oceans, meaning cargo had to be transported on land. But that requires a lot more energy than a ship which can go with the flow. As a result, Russian goods were more expensive to sell and foreign goods were more expensive to buy. Russian products could not compete with those of the English, the French or the Germans. And so Russian industry didn't grow as fast because they did not have access to as many customers as other European countries.
And yeah, this is one thing that I actually need to point out. Western European geography wasn't any better either. Again, that was one of the reasons why they went and start colonizing to find better places to get better resources. Obviously, Russia went eastward to colonize because they obviously couldn't go westward. Britain has absolutely no value. Even now, this is so apparent. The British economy went down. By the way, out of the whole G7, the British economy shrunk. Okay, it shrunk. So yeah, ever since Britain decolonized, it's just completely falling off. We have France here, who basically has a neo-colonial empire, which basically makes up a good 30 to 20% of the entire country's GDP. I forgot where the heck that quote came from, but who the heck said it? But someone said that without France's neo-colonial empire, France wouldn't even be top 10 GDP at all. Like, and in Germany, they never really colonized anywhere. Like, Germany was probably the only real country. No. I wouldn't even say Germany was the only real. Guys, a lot of these Western countries are only rich literally just because America. Okay, America just kind of just funded them, especially after World War II. Russia just never had that. Russia had nobody to do that for herself. Britain got destroyed, France got destroyed, Germany got destroyed. and they all were able to bounce back because of America funding them to bounce back. If America did not exist, quite frankly speaking, these countries will more or less be on the same level as Russia today. Really and truly. Now you could go and argue that, oh well, Russia colonized the East. Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it did. But I'm just pointing out like the realities of like why Russia is not as on par as say your average Western European country. Because what a lot of these videos do is that they try to just portray Russia as it's mostly Russia's fault, although here he's saying that it's geography, which is one of the main reasons why Russia didn't get on par with other countries. Although Russia technically still is on par with other countries. It has a GDP of $4 trillion. In fact, in June, it was literally ranked as a high income country back in June or September, I think, from a middle income country. So
instead,
oh my
the
goodness,
Russian elites focused on building more farms rather than building factories. And as a result, Russia's population increased from 14 million people in 1722 to 129 in 1897, as more and more parts of Russia would turn into farmland. But by the year 1800, only about 12.8% of people lived in towns or cities, compared to 40% in France and 70% in Germany. And while
yeah, at the height of the French colonial empire, you're comparing that. And I know Russia colonized the Far East, but dude, the Far East is literally tundra. It's tundra. Yeah, Russia colonized it, but it's so inhospitable that you can't even exploit. Like Russia has so much resources there, but it's just so hard to exploit.
While those other countries increased the productivity of individual farmers, in Russia, farmers were 16% poorer in 1800 than they were in 1700. At the same time, Russia was also politically less important, because without a modern industry, Russia couldn't produce modern weapons. And in 1853, Russia lost the war against France, Great Britain, and the Ottoman Empire. And so on one hand, Russia was facing a population that was becoming poorer and poorer and who might start a revolution. And on the other hand, Russia was facing a world in which they became weaker and weaker compared to countries like Great Britain, France, Germany, or the USA. And so
the USA is also another example of, America literally colonized the entirety of the modern American state, hilariously enough. That's why America is more or less rich today. America is blessed, geographically speaking. America was lucky. Literally easy recruit difficulty. The 90% of the Native Americans died, right? And not only that, but America's geography didn't have that inhospitable climate that Russia had. So America just got lucky, really and truly. Again, this is why I just don't like these type of videos, because they portray these countries as, oh, they're richer because they're just superior. They're just superior. And they just know what they're doing, but they don't go into proper details on why they're rich. Also, the amount of wars that America fought with natives because the natives were trying to protect their lands from literally being colonized. The most wars in American history was literally against Native Americans, okay, which were indigenous to the American continent. So America got rich because it got lucky in its colonization game. And eventually the European powers were killing each other too much that they completely forgot about America. And when they realized, America's too powerful, it was too late to do anything against American hegemony. So now guess what? America could have just portrayed its imperialism wherever the heck it wanted to around the world and profit even more off of that. Pax Americana. Yeah, Russia didn't have that luxury. Quite frankly speaking, the reason why Russia is so affected today, half of it is not even her fault. Russia literally was spawned in on veteran difficulty. Oh my goodness gracious me. Oh my goodness. This is why This is why I mean personally, I can't, like, I don't like to listen to this type of stuff. This is like one of the reasons right here, like, why I would prefer to learn Russian, because I can't trust what these people are saying. It's very inaccurate and it's just very wrong. Okay, and oh my god, look, there's so many people who look at me and say, "Oh, you're just a Russian supporter because oh, you want a Russian chick." Look, I don't have problems with getting women. I'm a Russian supporter because objectively speaking, like, it's better, quite frankly speaking. Most Russian people don't even know that I'm a Russian supporter. So like, oh, I'm like wearing this shirt as a troll, quite frankly speaking. Let's continue.
In the 1850s, the Russian Empire began looking for a solution.
At Papa John's.
Chapter 3. Laissez-faire Russia, failing to reform.
It's pronounced laissez-faire, but okay.
Russia's plan to begin their own industrialization started in 1861 with the Emancipation Reform of 1861. In this reform, the 23 million serfs living in Russia were granted their freedom. The idea was that by granting farmers more freedom, they would adopt new technologies, produce more food, and Russia would finally be able to industrialize and become rich. But there was a problem in its implementation. For example, from now on, serfs became free, independent farmers. Each farmer was given a plot of land that they themselves owned. But this land wasn't free. They had to pay a mortgage to buy the land. Those farmers were then not allowed to sell this land again. And if they died before repaying their mortgage, their children would inherit the land and the mortgage. But for millions of people, the land they were assigned wasn't large enough to support them and their families. In order to get more food, most families had livestock which was allowed to graze on the land of their landlords. But when serfs were freed, landlords demanded money in exchange for letting cattle walk on their land. As a result, any extra money those farmers earned usually went straight back to their former landlords. And a lot of people couldn't survive in this system and decided to leave their farm and find work somewhere else. But even if they did find work in a factory, they were still forced to repay the mortgage of that land hundreds of kilometers away. As a result, any extra money they earned always went to their former landlord. As a result, the emancipation of the serfs did very little to help those serfs. The other Russian farmers mostly lived in communes, and this reform did nothing to make them more efficient, meaning most Russian farmers weren't even affected by this reform at all. The government had hoped that by making a couple of changes to the social structure of Russia that they would be able to fix all the country's problems. But the problem was still a lack of competition, and by making sure that the profits of the average people largely went to the richest people, it meant that there weren't enough customers in Russia to support its own industry, and its geography made it impossible to sell to foreign customers. The only reliable customer Russia had was the government. As a result, the only truly profitable businesses was the military industry. The government needed weapons and was willing to pay whatever amount was needed to keep weapons factories operating. The Russian government paid for these factories and equipment by taking out foreign loans. And in order to repay these loans, the government taxed average people who were barely surviving. The government could have taxed the elites, seeing as they owned most of the wealth. But the Russian political system at that time worked in a way that the emperor kept the nobility rich and powerful, and in exchange those nobles supported the emperor. By taxing the elites, the Russian emperor would turn its supporters into its opponents. And so for the next 30 years, Russia industrialized a little bit, but in general the life of the average Russian wasn't any better.
Oh my gosh, dude. I mean, yeah, it's still it's literally the same way in, like, I don't know, everywhere else. When Britain colonized, it was most people weren't benefiting from it. It was literally just 1% of the population benefited from it. Same thing with France. I mean, same thing with most of these countries. I mean, I look at them today. But like I said before, again, they just got lucky because after they were destroyed after World War II, America funded them. But still, and they have a neo-colonial empire. But still, this could all be boiled down to just bad geography. And even then, it's like saying that Russia is not rich. I don't know if this is a clickbait title or what, but still inaccurate.
Chapter 4.
Although I do agree with some of the things that he's saying, let me elaborate. What I'm saying is, I don't think it has such a big effect that it just completely just stopped Russia from being on par with, other countries comparably to Western countries. Because look at China. You could say that China had it worse than Russia, and look at how much China has developed. Really and truly. Okay? Although China has a ridiculously large population, you can say that, but you can still use China as an example of how, despite many unfortunate things happening, because China has a reputation of just having civil war after civil war after civil war after civil war, I mean, it still is one of the biggest economies in the world.
Industrial Russia. The failure of the aristocracy. In 1891, Russia suffered a drought and then a famine, and it's difficult to tax farmers when those farmers can't grow food. If Russia had developed industry, they could simply tax factories, but those barely existed. As a result, Russia couldn't repay all the loans it took out for industrialization, and so the government decided to change their economic policy to prevent this from happening again. Instead of waiting for the elites to invest in industrialization, it was now the government investing in industrialization. In order to build a basic factory, you needed coal. There are different types of coal. The best coal for a factory in the 19th century was something called coking coal. But for a very long time, Russia did not have access to coking coal. But this changed with the development of the Donetsk region in modern-day Ukraine. This region had access to coking coal and iron ore, but it only started industrializing in the 1870s. Before then, Russia had to import most of its coal. But importing coal was very expensive for Russia, meaning that most factories, machines and trains in Russia had to run on very expensive coal. But by the 1890s, it was possible for Russia to make their own, just as countries like France, the United Kingdom or Germany were doing. Using Russian-made steel and coal, they were able to build rail lines connecting Russian cities and industries together. As a result, Russia was finally able to overcome its large size. Instead of relying on rivers which didn't even reach the oceans, Russia could now build a rail line from one part of the country to another. They connected the iron mines of the Urals with the port in St. Petersburg and the steel factory in Ukraine. The government then funded factories to be built all over the empire. And now, Russia seemed to finally be able to develop as a nation and stop being poor. But there was a problem, because when the Russian government funded a new factory or company, that business was given a monopoly, meaning that it was the only business allowed to operate in a particular region or industry in Russia. As a result, Russian factories did not have to compete with each other. And when factories don't compete with each other, they have no incentive to innovate. And without innovation, your economy can't develop. The reason the government used this system is because the emperor could give companies to the elites in exchange for their political support. And
so, I want to just point out the fact that, yes, what he's saying is true, but even in the Western countries, they were also facing the same issues where the elites were taking all the money. Hilariously enough, that's why communism even was thought of as an idea. It was a response to how basically the elites in the West would basically work you 16 hours per day, hardly any off days if you had any off days, and you make nothing. That's why communism became a thing, became an idea. A lot of people tend to just overlook that. No, I'm not really supportive of communism, but I do understand communism. I get it, really and truly, and a lot of people don't understand that. Like, okay, if everything was so sunshine and rainbows in the West, right? Like, why would Karl Marx, a German by the way, like even thought of communism. Ideas like communism wouldn't have been a thing if everything was truly sunshine and rainbows in the West. But again, things were not sunshine and rainbows in the West. Even now, today, America has the largest wealth inequality in the developed world. 80% of the wealth is owned by 1% of the population in America. Bro, can't make that up. Cannot make that up. So even now today, like the same problems here. And this is something that I just noticed with all of this stuff. Even Russian people, I've noticed with Russian people, they think that all the stuff that happens to Russia or happened to Russia is unique to Russia. That like the West does not have that problem or anything. Like, oh, the West is just magically different and just magically like no. Guys, the more you really and truly like take your time to like look, the more you realize, holy crap, there's nothing that different between these two regions at all.
In order to protect them from competition even further, they put high taxes on foreign products. So even if Russian products were more expensive, they were still cheaper than foreign products. And if an entrepreneur wanted to start a new company of their own, they would need to receive permission from either the Russian emperor or his minister of finance, meaning that it was almost impossible for someone with a good business idea to actually set up that business in Russia. As a result, any industry that was developed did not keep developing because there was zero competition. On top of that, the Russian people were poorly educated, with only 28% of Russians 9 years or older able to read or write, compared to, let's say, 96% in Germany, France or the UK. And education in Russia was largely determined by one's ethnic group. German and Jewish people living in Russia were much better educated, but they usually didn't speak Russian very well. And as a result, the knowledge that Russia did have was not easily shared with the rest of the population.
Bro, did he put... Bro, you can't... You put что? You put что? You couldn't at least put the proper Cyrillic word? Oh my god. What type of video is this, bro?
As a result,
holy moly,
Russia's industrialization was a lot slower than other countries. By 1913, the average Russian was about 50% more productive than they were in 1860. The average German in that same time period became 250% more productive. And the average US American, 275% more productive. And even if we compare it to, let's say, Japan, a country that also started its industrialization process in the 1860s, they had become 75% more productive. And then Russia made one of the worst economic decisions in its history. They went to war with Germany in World War I between 1914 to 1917.
Yeah, I have to agree. Well, that was, yeah. This is why Russia started to actually get back.
Over 2 million soldiers suffered a famine as those soldiers weren't producing food anymore, and the people started 2 revolutions. In the end, Russia became communist and was renamed the Soviet Union.
Oh my god, no. No, it was not renamed the Soviet Union. Oh my, again... Bro, like, this is why I had to react to this, because it's like, yes, there's some things that he's saying that is partially true, but a broken clock is at least right twice, okay, people? Again, like, the vibe that I get off from this video is more Western superiority. I just get a Western superiority complex vibe from this video, and it annoys the living hell out of me, because I'm so sick and tired of people thinking that the West is just the superior society that just knows it all, has everything down, and truly will solve everyone's problem. In reality, that's not true. No, Russia was not renamed the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union replaced Russia. The Soviet Union was a whole completely different geopolitical entity. Russia did not exist as a sovereign nation anymore. Russia still existed as an entity, but it existed as an entity within the Soviet Union, which is a whole new different country. The Soviet Union could not have been possible without the Bolsheviks in Ukraine, the Bolsheviks in Belarus, and even then, there were so many different factions of the Russian Civil War that it's just too much to talk about. So sitting here and saying, "No, Russia." Wait, hold on a second.
Russia was renamed the Soviet Union. Russia was renamed Soviet Union.
Like, oh my gosh, dude, that's just wrong because you're giving the idea that, oh, the Russians wanted it. When in reality, the Russians didn't even support the Bolsheviks that much as you'd think. They didn't even support the Bolsheviks that much. If anything, the main reason why they probably supported the Bolsheviks was because they were sick and tired of the war, understandably. And they literally just wanted food and land. Like, they didn't genuinely, they weren't, ideologically speaking, they weren't really communists. They weren't. My goodness. Russia renamed itself to the Soviet Union. No. In fact, the Soviet Union had planned to expand itself to other countries. However, the Polish-Soviet War stopped that. So, woo! Communist Russia! The Communist Revolution! Let's see what he has to say about this.
So now, without nobility, Russia should finally be able to industrialize and stop being poor. But there was a problem. The Russian Revolution was an economic disaster. The first thing the government did was to take control of the economy. The more companies they controlled, the less efficient those industries became. Then Russia had a civil war, which the communists did eventually win. And so now it was 1921. The Civil War was over and Russia's economy was 63% smaller than in 1913 before the war. And the new communist leadership had to decide which version of communism they were going to use. There are a lot of...
So he does talk about World War I, yeah. But he also completely ignores the fact that the Russian Civil War, which is kind of Germany's fault because Germany sponsored Lenin to go to Russia, by the way, hilariously enough. You know, yeah, that killed a lot more people, which did affect Russia a lot, or whatever.
Different versions. On one hand, the government can give control of companies to its employees who then democratically decide how to run the businesses they work for. On the other hand, you have a communism where nobody owns businesses except the state. And the Soviet Union decided on the second option. But why? Well, Russia is incredibly big. In order to create policies that affect the whole country, you need to have a government that can actually control all of it. And in the case of Russia, there were a lot of regions that still wanted to be independent. And if you give democracy to people who want independence, then you will eventually lose control over those regions. They might withhold vital resources, or civil war might destroy access entirely. The further away those regions are, the more difficult it is to control them, because most Russians lived in Europe. As a result, if Russia wanted to maintain control over Asian regions, it would constantly have to send troops and material from Europe to Asia because there weren't enough Russians living in Siberia to do it themselves. In order to prevent this, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and modern-day Russia have all used the same strategy: strict government authority over all parts of regional government and regional economies. Under the
Independence is overrated most of the time. I think independence is overrated most of the time. Yeah, there's some separatist movements, but really and truly, I don't even know why these countries would want to leave Russia. It's actually better for them to stay a part of Russia, because when you're a lone country, you're more susceptible to foreign incursion, foreign influence, and with the whole American imperialism thing, all these rich regions in Russia that so-called want to be independent, you really think that they would be independent? No. America would swoop in quickly, super duper quickly if it can.
The Russian Empire, they did this by giving these lands over to loyal nobility. Modern-day Russia has oligarchs, and the Soviet Union had something called a command economy. The way a command economy worked in the Soviet Union is that they created a 5-year plan. In this plan, they planned everything to the smallest detail. Which products are made? How is each product made? What amount of each product is made? And 1,000 other things were all put in this plan. Factories were given quotas they had to achieve using the plan created by the central government. If a factory failed to meet these standards, they would receive more resources to help them. And this strategy was quite effective in the early Soviet Union. That's because it got rid of the monopolies and cartels. In the Russian Empire, nobility might refuse to do business with someone because they were in a different faction in the government. They might make deals in exchange for personal favors instead of what is economically efficient. As a result, the economy was incredibly inefficient. But under the 5-year plans, those factories, companies and regional governments were given quotas. In order to reach their quotas, they had to connect the economy together and find more efficient ways of getting their job done. And as a result, the old imperial trade barriers were removed. But because Russia had little industry left after a world war and a civil war, they were forced to import most of these products in the beginning. They paid for it by selling food to other countries. At times, they sold so much food there wasn't enough for the Soviet people, creating famines across the USSR, which in turn meant fewer workers and more unhealthy workers. As a result, the Soviet Union's economy didn't grow as fast as it could have.
Yeah, that's partially true. It's funny because a lot of people, no, most people tend to overlook the fact that famine happened across the entire union. Okay, I see so many people who try to argue that the Holodomor, the famine that happened in Ukraine, was a genocide. It was not. It was simply bad policy, plain and straight. But a bunch of Western propagandists, they like to paint it out as a genocide.
The result of this policy was a 2% increase in industry per year compared to just 0.5% growth under the Russian Empire. See on screen right now what the difference between 0.5 and 2% growth is over a period of 100 years. However, the Russian worker was less productive than similarly developed countries at the time. Farmers were 10% less productive and factory workers were 7% less productive. Chapter 6.
Stalin!
A command economy. By 1928, 13% of the Soviet's population worked in industry, producing 52% of the country's GDP. The Soviet government looked at these figures and calculated that for every 10% of the population moving from farm work to factory work, that the economy would grow by 69%. And they concluded that was very nice. And so the communist government decided to move people into cities and factories in order to make the Soviet Union richer. But according to the government, people weren't going to the cities fast enough on their own. So the new Russian leader, Joseph Stalin, implemented a brutal policy of forced relocation. They took people's farms from them and forced them to work in factories and live in cities. Between 1928 and 1940, another 20% of the population moved into the cities. But cities require a lot more maintenance than towns and farms. They need sewage systems, public transport, healthcare services, and much more. And you need educated people to run those services. But the Russian Empire never put a lot of effort into education. And so the USSR set up education programs around the country to bring the literacy rate up. By the 1930s, the Soviet Union had enough skilled laborers that they were able to build factories all on their own without having to import materials from abroad.
And this is the thing, is I do believe that the Russian Empire could have industrialized without the Soviet Union replacing it. Even when the Soviet Union replaced it, it's like, I do believe the Soviet Union could have easily industrialized without having those millions of people dead. Quite frankly speaking. So, even then though, the Soviet Union still did industrialize. And by the end of World War II, granted, they had a lot of support from the Allies, aka Lend-Lease, which saved them. Which is funny, because, wait, hold on a second. I want to hear if he's going to talk about that. Hold on a second.
And by now, a new problem appeared in the communist system: corruption. If you were a factory manager, you might take some materials you get and sell them on a black market. Or maybe you are just not that good at your job and don't want to admit it, so you start lying about problems that might not really exist. But how do you solve this problem? Well, according to Joseph Stalin, the solution was punishment. Very harsh punishment. Bad managers were sent to gulags, but that just makes those managers hide their activities even more. And so they implemented a system of denunciation, where people working in factories were encouraged to denounce their bosses. And while this fear that anyone might denounce you did work, it also meant that if you wanted to get a promotion, you could simply denounce one of your bosses. Because anyone could be sent to the gulag, from the most brilliant rocket scientists to war heroes to the Polish.
Wow, okay. Okay, now that, I did not know that.
Regions most people did not want to live. Siberia.
Woo!
The average...
Look at the amount. Woo! I thought the gulags was mostly in the Far East. I didn't know there was this much gulags. Oh, wow, that's a lot of gulags.
Gulag worker was only half as productive as a free worker. However, they could be sent to places nobody else wanted to go to develop vital infrastructure in far-off regions. And as the Soviet economy advanced, its people had a wider selection of goods available to them. They had more money, and they were generally healthier, although there were notable exceptions such as the Ukrainians. However, if Russia had stayed out of World War I and simply continued their economic policies under the Russian Empire, they would have achieved roughly the same results by the late 1930s.
Yeah, again, it's funny. I mean, he kind of contradicts himself here, because he's saying that the policies of the Russian Empire is why Russia is poor today, but then he says had Russia stayed out of World War I, they would have achieved the same levels that the Soviets achieved. So it's like he just contradicts himself right there. I don't even think he realizes it, which doesn't make any sense. Like, I mean, I do agree that World War I really stopped Russia. In fact, Germany started World War I because it wanted to weaken Russia. Germany predicted by 1917, if a war did not begin with the Russian Empire would have been an unstoppable force in Europe. Everybody in Europe was more or less getting afraid of Russia. Like, everybody realized that the Russian Empire was actually like this close to becoming a juggernaut that nobody could ignore. Much the same way like how America was becoming a juggernaut, but everybody ignored America. Russia was this close for that to happen to it. And that's why Germany really wanted to start a war with Russia, to completely stop that, to thwart that from happening, and to completely weaken Russia. And guess what? It got what it wanted. It did. It really did. But at what cost? Really and truly. But at what cost?
Meaning that all those people who starved, all those gulags, and all that suffering achieved exactly the same as the Russian imperial system would have. And while
exactly, I do agree that communism hampered Russia. It did. Russia should have not become communist. It should not have. It should have stayed. There were literally evidence to prove that the czars were literally improving Russia, and they were planning to completely industrialize Russia. In fact, many of the Soviet plans that they used to industrialize Russia, they just straight up took it from the czars that they deposed from the old Russian Empire. Again, like even like everybody in Europe was slowly like starting to realize that Russia is getting to the point where if you don't do something about them now, you can't do something about them anymore. It's exactly what happened with America. The Europeans had time to stop America from becoming a hegemonic power, but they completely ignored America. Plenty of times they pointed out America was becoming way too strong, but they just completely ignored them because, you know, their foreign policy and all that fun stuff.
the average...
And look at what happened. Now America has everybody in a chain pretty much, except for Russia. And that's why America tries to portray Russia as this super bad guy, because how dare a country not want to cocksuck America? Oh, so bad. Am I right, folks?
Russia was wealthier, they were still much poorer than developed countries in Europe and North America. But in the end, Russia was able to regain its position as an important European power. But this was largely due to the fact that the rest of the world suffered from the Great Depression, while the Soviet Union did not. It's not so much.
And that speaks volumes. That speaks volumes. That speaks volumes, okay? The so-called superior West suffered a huge Great Depression, but yet the Soviet Union did not suffer the Great Depression. Think about that for a second. Think about that for a second, okay?
That the Soviet.
This is why I'm saying, like, no, Russia. There are plenty of times where Russia could have recovered very much and become rich, but Russia was just unlucky.
Command economy was so much better, it just happened to emerge in a time when capitalism was failing and the far right was failing even harder.
What? What? Fuck. Okay. Hold on. I almost cursed there.
Capitalism, guys. Capitalism just so happened to be feeling in that moment. And, you know, capitalism is totally not feeling, totally not because capitalism has so much flaws in it. No, guys, it just so happened to be failing. Oh, wait, what? Oh, the Soviet Union is suffering? Yeah. Oh, they just got lucky. It's all a coincidence. It's all a coincidence. And it's a coincidence, guys.
Oh my goodness gracious me. So he doesn't go into any detail or anything. He just simply says capitalism was failing. Okay, why was capitalism failing? Can you show the faults of capitalism? Again, communism was invented as an idea in response to the way how capitalism is. But no! Capitalism just so happened to be failing. And it's funny because capitalism... even today, capitalism is this close. I mean, look at Britain, for example. The British Empire was a trade empire. That's capitalism. The British Empire was an empire built off capitalism. Literally. Oh, and now that Britain lost his entire empire, guess what? Oh, its economy shrunk. Its economy shrunk. America has its problems too. America has a horrible, horrendous wealth inequality, horrible housing crisis.
But remember, guys, capitalism just so happened to be feeling in this one moment. No, capitalism is freaking.
Capitalism fails you all the time. Even in Russia, I could literally say capitalism is kind of failing Russia right now because Russia is led by an oligarchy. When you get capitalism, guess what you get? You get oligarchy. And America is also an oligarchy too. America is also an oligarchy as well. So,
Chapter 7.
Okay, so he completely ignores the fact that World War II is probably the main reason why Russia is poor, or quote unquote poor. He completely ignores World War II. I cannot believe what I'm watching right now. Okay, so long story short, right? I mean, everybody knows that World War II, okay, the war which the dictator of Germany literally wanted to exterminate Russian people and enslave them, by the way. The war where Russia and other Eastern Slavic peoples literally had to fought basically for their lives, okay? This war affected Russia so bad that the Russian population hasn't really recovered from it. It never recovered from it. It barely... guys, you can literally look this up if you think I'm speaking out my ass. It barely recovered from it. And to grow an economy, you need to have a population. You need to have a big population. In fact, it's so bad that Russia has a huge demographic crisis right now. And he just completely overlooks that World War II is arguably was like the nail in the coffin to just completely stop Russia's development. Oh, but Germany also lost 25% of their population because of World War II. And look at Germany. Yeah, because they had the Marshall Plan. They had America who literally funded Germany to be rebuilt. Yeah, Russia didn't have that. Western Europe would have probably never recovered. Well, depending on the country. They were lucky because America was there to fund them. God damn, he just completely overlooks. Oh my goodness gracious me. Okay.
Cold War Russia. The slow.
And then he goes into the freaking Cold War. Oh my god. Oh my god, dude. I'm.
Slow down. Throughout this video, the territory of Russia and the Soviet Union has changed quite a lot, and it will keep changing. However, for the sake of this video, we will focus on the territory of modern-day Russia, and we're not including occupied territories in Ukraine, Georgia, or Moldova. During World War II, Russia...
Yeah, that tells me everything I need to know about this guy. Sorry to break this to you, but... Yeah, those territories are part of Russia now. Well, at least the territories in Ukraine, because Russia annexed it. And I'm sorry to break this to you as well. Oh, bloody hell. Yeah, Ukraine does not have the means to take it back. So, also, Crimea was literally annexed a part of Russia for almost literally 10 years. And it was very much a part of the Russian economy at that point. Yeah, but he doesn't. What in the world am I watching? Okay.
Process of rapid industrialization as they received foreign aid from their allies. As a result, the Soviet Union after World War II had become a superpower with an army able to defeat that of any other country in the world.
Okay, yeah, this is the one thing that I was waiting for. Yes, the Soviet Union became a superpower because it got Lend-Lease from the Allies to defeat Germany, but because of that, it kind of up the Soviet. Yeah, that's what I do agree with that.
Except perhaps the USA. And a few years later, Stalin died as well in 1953, and the new Soviet leaders decided to remove a lot of the cruel policies of Stalin's. Gulags were closed, punishments were reduced, and ethnic cleansing was largely abolished. But this presented a new problem. Under Stalin, managers were kept in line through fear of punishment. Bad managers were often sent to gulags. While this had some success, punishing people for doing bad things isn't as effective as rewarding people for doing good things. So they created a system where the leaders of different regions and businesses would get a performance review. The leaders that scored the highest were rewarded, and those who scored the lowest were fired. As a result, Russia would finally get some competition, with only the most competent people getting promoted based on their performance. This is a system that China and Vietnam are using today, which has resulted in their rapid economic development. But if you're corrupt, then this system is a major threat to you. And in the Soviet Union, there were so many corrupt officials that they managed to block this new system. As a result, Russia did not get competition. It did not root out corruption, and eventually the Russian economy just became more and more corrupt. If the Soviet Union had actually implemented competition between its regions, then it's likely that their industry would have kept developing over time, and that they would eventually have become a rich nation. But instead, Russia stuck to corruption.
I guess you could have that take. Yeah, it's true that the Soviet economy stagnated, yeah. But in the Soviet Union is a very interesting entity in it that you weren't really poor, but you weren't really rich. People had houses and whatnot. Living conditions vary because Russia is a continental, well, the Soviet Union, I should say, is a continental landmass. So you can't really compare. you can't. It's very hard to talk about the Soviet Union because it's such a huge country, massive country. Even now, I mean, like Russia today has a larger landmass than freaking Pluto. Imagine the Soviet Union, which was a union way bigger than Russia. I mean, it's really hard because what was that poll that said that what 70% of Russia said that life was better during the Soviet Union? I have no idea. Something like that.
The system the USSR used instead was to divide the country up between themselves. Different leaders would receive control over a region or an industry. This meant there wasn't as much oversight as different departments sometimes didn't know what the others were doing, meaning there were more opportunities to be corrupt. And in exchange for being given a piece of the USSR's economy or territory, you in turn support the leader of the Soviet Union. As a result, Russia turned back to its old system where the entire country was carved up between the elites. Except instead of the elites being nobility, they could now be from anywhere. And so once again there was zero competition and zero innovation. And if a manager failed to meet their production quota in their 5-year plans, the government simply gave them more resources. As a result, inefficient factories were given more resources, while efficient factories were given fewer resources, meaning that more and more money was spent on making the economy less efficient. And by the 1970s, Russia started importing high-tech products from other countries because they lacked the innovation to make these products themselves.
And let's not forget that the West had the benefit of colonizing, and imperialism, by the way. Let's not forget about that. And they just had the benefit of colonizing and imperializing places with great geography, by the way. So
while they had
keep in mind, Russia is still on veteran difficulty.
A lot of scientific achievements, they were unable to turn them into useful products. To give an example of this, let's look at the Soviet video game industry. Because the most popular video game of all time isn't Minecraft or Pokemon or Grand Theft Auto, it's Tetris. And Tetris was created in 1984 in the Soviet Union. The Soviets could have set up an entire industry of software engineers dedicated to making some of the best video games in the world. They could have exported them to Japan, the USA, and Western Europe. However, in the Soviet Union, the entire economy was managed in a 5-year plan. So in order to make a new video game, central planners had to plan those games 5 years in advance. And those central planners were some of the most experienced people in any industry. But innovation usually comes from younger people looking to change the current system, rather than relying on things that were done in the past. As a result, a bunch of software engineers who had experience with, let's say, telecommunication software or industrial software had to come together and plan video games for the next 5 years. They simply didn't know what to do or what customers wanted. Even with the best intentions, innovation cannot be planned. And as a result, the largest video game industries are located in the USA, the European Union, and Japan. And this was the case for a lot of new industries the Soviet Union tried to create, but failed to turn into useful products. The only exceptions to this were the military, space, and industrial software. And as the Soviet economy...
Okay, yeah, I guess you could say that as well, but video games, I don't really think video games would be the deciding factor if a country is rich or not. Also, another thing that he kind of isn't pointing out is how a lot of the countries that the West colonized or imperialized, they became like so poor that many of the people there goes to Western countries, and because of that, those Western countries, especially America, they're constantly getting influx of foreigners who aren't even American, who are geniuses, who are bright, smart, intelligent, who bring their stuff to America, thus boosting the American economy, quite frankly speaking. Russia didn't have that luxury, nor did the Soviet Union have that luxury as well. largely because of propaganda against the Soviet Union that portrayed it like that of sorts. So that's another thing that he's completely forgetting, is the fact that many people from third world countries are flocking to the West because unfortunately America is like, due to imperialism, America is super duper rich, and now those people whose countries are being imperialized by America, they think that America is the best place in the world, haha. So they abandon their country and leave their country for dead, and the country has no people with innovative ideas, good ideas, or anything to basically help the country, quite frankly speaking. And this is kind of the same in Russia too. In it that there's a lot of Russians that want to leave Russia. Like when the whole Ukraine fiasco happened, the amount of Russians that basically abandoned their country and left for the West, I mean, that basically proves my point. It does, because now they're in the West, and now they're boosting the West now. Instead of staying in Russia and boosting Russia, but no, they're in the West. And that's how the West is able to just stay where it is. As long as it just keeps portraying itself as this, I don't know, heaven, haven, utopia, and most people fall for it. Yeah, they're going to keep flocking and flocking and flocking here. My country's rich because, yes, we go to different countries. I live in America right now, but we don't stay overseas. We go back. When we have our education, our skills, all of that stuff, we don't stay overseas. We go back to Barbados. That was one of the main reasons why Barbados became a high-income, wealthy nation. And even then, overseas, when we're overseas, we typically give back to our families that live there. We send stuff back. Even now, my mother, she sends stuff to my family in St. Lucia. Big boxes, a whole bunch of stuff. She sends it down there to support them. That's the thing that that many people from the Caribbean do, whether it be money or anything like that. So those people who are able to go overseas from the Caribbean, especially from Barbados, they're a big factor in why, I mean, people like me, for example, you think I would be able to create this YouTube channel if I was in Barbados? Probably not. I mean, maybe. Who knows? But usually many people who go overseas, from my country anyways, they usually are able to give back what they get from that overseas country instead of getting from the overseas country and basically just staying in that overseas country, thus boosting that country's economy. I don't know if that makes sense, but let's continue. Russia doesn't have that luxury. I hear so many Russian people and they're like, I want to leave Russia, I want to leave Russia, I want to leave Russia, because they're so brainwashed by Western propaganda. It's ridiculous, especially the younger Russians that are my age. Like, oh my god.
In the 1970s and 80s, they had to import more and more products from other countries in order to make up for their own lack of innovation. By the 1950s, the Soviet Union imported roughly 10% of their GDP, but by the 1980s, it was up to 25%. But if you want to buy from other countries, you need money. So the USSR began selling oil and gas to Western Europe and weapons to other communist nations. But this wouldn't work forever, and by 1985, the USSR was in deep economic crisis.
I have a confession.
Chapter 8. Declining Russia. The breakup of the USSR. And in 1985, a new Soviet government took over under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, and they wanted to completely reform the Soviet Union. They wanted to give control of businesses over to people who worked at them, they wanted businesses to compete in a free market, and the government would stop financing failing businesses. But they faced a major issue. In order to implement these reforms, the government needed to know exactly what was wrong with the country. But up until now, it was illegal to openly criticize the communist communist government. In order to fix communism, they had to allow free speech, and only then did the government begin reforming the economy, introducing new changes over the course of 5 years. But if the government stopped giving money to inefficient businesses, then those workers would lose their jobs and customers lose access to products. And because they were allowed to criticize the government, a lot of people who suffered during this reform began openly talking about how terrible their new government was. On the fringes of the USSR, people didn't talk about reforming communism, but about ending communism and leaving the Soviet Union. And in just a few short years, the Soviet Union broke apart as first its vassal states in Europe declared their independence, and then the regions inside the Union declared independence. In the end, this transition of the economy produced...
They were already independent countries. They just simply elected to get rid of the communist parties that were there. Actually, I'm pretty sure one Soviet republic still has its communist party. Is it Romania? I think it's Romania that still has its communist party there. They were re-elected or something like that. It's either Romania or... It's a country in the Balkans, but I can't remember which one it is, but okay.
Some small results. On average, in 1989, the average Russian earned $7,112 per year. A wealthy country was classified as earning $7,620 per year at that time, turning Russia into an upper middle income country, with the average Russian being about 2/3 as wealthy as the average Portuguese person and about half as wealthy as the average Italian person at that time. Chapter 9.
Okay. Yeah, the Cold War. Dude, the Cold War is probably another reason why Russia is not on par to where it is, because of American propaganda and the way how America portrayed Russia as his evil empire. Oh my gosh, I mean, he just completely overlooks that. Even now today, we have so many Americans who do not understand the difference between Russia and the Soviet Union. But wait a minute, we have like 10 minutes. I have a lot more to say.
Capitalist Russia, the oligarchy. And so now, without communism, Russia should finally develop and stop being poor. But there were a few problems. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the newly independent countries went into roughly 2 directions. There was the direction that countries like Poland and Slovakia went into, transitioning into a capitalist economy by opening up their economy to foreign trade, joining the European Union, and using the large number of highly educated people from the Soviet era to develop newer and more advanced industries, such as selling car parts to German factories or providing cheaper medical treatments, such as laser eye surgery or hair transplants. And it's expected that the former Soviet states that joined the EU will be at the same level of development as the West by the 2030s to 2050s, with Poland and Czechia being the first to reach this level. And then there is the other group.
Again, do you just see like the Western supremacy complex with this guy? Yeah, it's not. No. Look. Yeah, that's gonna happen, but again, they literally had to be bailed out by the EU and the West. Okay, the West literally had to give them a butt ton of money for their economies to increase. Okay, in a nutshell. Okay, again, Russia never had anyone to do that. Russia was never blessed geographically. Russia never had anyone to build itself out. It suffered so many wars that completely hampered them. To this day, their population is in a crisis to this day. Russia couldn't, the lands that Russia colonized was more or less inhospitable, so they couldn't even benefit from it, unlike the West. Russian imperialism was more or less not as big as the West. And now Western propaganda is making so many Russians want to leave or just straight up leave Russia for the West, making the situation even worse.
Group of countries. These countries instead turned the Soviet system into an oligarchy. This group of countries includes Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Russia. And an oligarchy.
Where's Ukraine? Where's Ukraine? Where is you? There's absolutely no way this man says this and he does not put Ukraine. I'm telling you, this video has to have some type of agenda behind it. There's absolutely no way. Ukraine has the worst oligarch system in all of Eastern Europe. That's not even debatable. What? What? No way he did not just put the most corrupted country in Europe, even more corrupted than Russia. Russia actually improved after the fall of the Soviet Union. Even now, it's classified as a high-income country. Today.
Is a terrible way to run your economy. But how did they get there?
America's an oligarchy. America is an oligarchy. America is literally an oligarchy. Oh my god, I'm telling you, I'm gonna have like someone in my comment. Actually, no.
America isn't an oligarchy. America is a democracy.
No, that whole America's a democracy. That's a whole facade. That's BS. Below the surface, everything is literally ran by the top 1% of the population, which owns the money. Look at the CEO, who was an oligarch himself, that got unalived. Look at how quick they were to try and find the assassin that unalived him. But yet, shootings are constantly happening in America, and those cases go on for years. The cops they try, but they don't try as hard. They don't do a manhunt. They don't do nothing like that. Why? Because, he was an oligarch. He had the money. So please do not come in my comments that America is not an oligarchy. It is. It literally is, dude. Everything is literally decided by who has the most money. I don't feel like explaining this. This video is going on for long enough. You can go and do your own digging. Maybe if I do another like reaction or something, I'll explain that there. But this video is going on for too long. I mean, this is why I don't like this video. This is so wrong. Wait, hold on a second. And the video has over 500,000 views. 500,000 views. 500,000 people watch this, and I guarantee you majority of them are going to take this at face value, and now they're going to go and unironically say that Russia is poor. You know how annoying it is whenever I try to explain this to people that Russia actually isn't poor? I see so many brainwashed people come and call me dumb or something like that. Or they say like, oh, you're just defending Russia because you just want a Russian chick. Even though I don't have problems with getting women. I don't. I'm 190 centimeters tall. And in person, I look way better in person. So I really don't. My God.
Well, the Soviet government had strict control over the economy. When that government collapsed, the controls were removed, until the government only controlled social services, fiscal policy, and monetary policy, like most countries around the world are doing today. But who should control all the businesses if the government was losing control of them? Well, the workers. And so employees were given a share in the business they worked at. But the economies of the former Soviet countries were in ruin. The Soviet system relied on central planning, and suddenly, inexperienced managers had to come up with their own plans. As more Soviet countries declared independence, it became harder for factories to do business with each other, as they were now in two different countries, meaning certain goods might be too expensive or could not be created at all. And thanks to the reform before the USSR collapsed, the countries were already in an economic crisis even before the breakup. And so a lot of companies were mostly worthless, and a lot of them went bankrupt, and a lot of people were fired and struggled to survive. And then, a couple of rich people came in and offered to buy their worthless shares in the companies. Most people were desperate, and people who are desperate are more likely to sell their own possessions. This happened so much that eventually a small group of people was able to seize control of most of the Russian economy between 1989 and 1993. This small group of people were then included into the government, providing political support to the president, and in return the president gives them free rein to do almost anything they want, as long as it doesn't cause trouble for the central government. And so Russia essentially returned to the old imperialist and communist systems. The elites controlled the entire economy. Each elite controls one part of the economy and can manage it the way they want to, as long as they don't oppose government policy. And in fact, a lot of Soviet departments were simply bought up and given a new name: Gazprom, UES, Transneft, Rosbank, and Roscontract. The elites in charge of these companies are called oligarchs, and those oligarchs have organized this system in such a way that each person has a monopoly in a particular industry or region, similar to what happened under the Russian Empire during the early industrialization period, where businesses might refuse to cooperate because they are in different factions in the government, where certain regions will sell off resources in exchange for political favors, and where competition is almost non-existent. Russia has transitioned into a new type of economic model, a model called industrial feudalism.
Go small.
Chapter 10.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Hold on. Wait. Putin's Russia. Hold on a second. Let's hear him.
Putin's Russia. Industrial feudalism.
Even though oligarchy is literally everywhere. Okay.
Under President Putin, the country was carved up between the oligarchs, who each got to rule a portion of the economy or a portion of Russia's territory. They generally get to make up their own rules in their own companies and regions, as long as they don't contradict the decisions of the president. The oligarchs keep the president in power, and in exchange the president keeps the oligarchy rich. And so the new Russia continued the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire's tradition of little competition, little innovation, and little development.
Wrong. Okay, so I watched this YouTube short a long time ago where it was a Jew who lived in the Soviet Union, and he was explaining how in the Soviet Union you couldn't do businesses, you couldn't really do any of that, you couldn't do none of that. No. And then he said that when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Russian Federation replaced it, Russia became an independent sovereign nation. He said what he saw was more businesses popping up and more entrepreneurship, all that fun stuff. And he said that is the difference of both countries that a lot of people don't seem to get. So,
To understand how the oligarchy controls the economy and stops innovation, let's look at Russian agriculture. Russia has a lot of farmers, and those farmers don't sell their harvests directly to customers. They sell it to a wholesaler. But what if your government makes a law which said that only one wholesale company is allowed to operate in your area? As a result, that company can ask a low price for the food farmers produce because they aren't allowed to sell to anyone else. Those wholesalers then once again sell that food at a much higher price to supermarkets. As a result, the farmer stays poor and the oligarch in charge of the wholesale company gets very, very rich. And as a result, those farmers don't even have enough money to invest in their own business. And so the average farmer can spend a lot less on innovation. And this process is common throughout Russia using different methods. The goal of Russia's economy isn't to make its people richer, but to keep the oligarchy in power. As a result, the Russian government has become more and more corrupt because a corrupt government and
I disagree because the lives of Russians have literally, you could check the statistics on this, ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, things have literally gotten better. Until the West started to demonize Russia and portray it as this evil empire.
enriches the oligarchy. For example, social services are in the hands of the oligarchy, who take some of that money for themselves. There are exceptions to this, however. For example, when Russia started a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the leader of the central bank was able to prevent the Russian currency from becoming worthless. Thanks to this one lady's leadership and the organization she manages, she was able to stave off disaster. And that's just one competent person in one key position. Russia has plenty of smart, educated, competent people, but their talents simply aren't being used. But of course, not every—
I disagree. I disagree, but
Russian
okay.
works for an oligarch. Outside the oligarchy is an economy with plenty of smart, educated and competent people, but their talents aren't being utilized to the fullest extent. These people tend to be more entrepreneurial and set up new businesses in new industries not controlled by the oligarchy. But as soon as those industries become successful and grow large enough, the government steps in, takes over the companies and hands them over to one of the oligarchs. The goal is to prevent outsiders from gaining too much power, but also keeping the elites happy by occasionally giving them a new business. And so any new successful industry in Russia is turned into yet another oligarch-controlled industry without competition and without innovation.
He really just loves competition. I mean, if a business is already successful, like, what is the point of having competition? Like, you could have innovation without competition. You do realize that, right? If a product is bad, you're gonna have to innovate it to change it. Like, I get it, competition, they'll change it more, but you can still have innovation without competition, but okay.
But if your property can be taken away from you by the government at any moment, it also means that an oligarch who is no longer useful might have their property taken away from them as well. And so, in order to keep their money safe, Russian oligarchs don't invest that money into Russia, but they send it to foreign bank accounts. They put that money in the USA, the EU and Switzerland, which were historically a safe place for people to invest their money in, regardless of political alignment. And this is also the case for a lot of foreign companies. If a large foreign company sets up factories in Russia, then the government can take those factories away at any moment if that company does something the Russian government doesn't like. While there were companies operating in Russia after it became capitalist, most companies preferred investing in countries with strong property rights, where they can be certain their businesses won't be stolen from them. As a result, Russia has largely isolated its economy from foreign competition, meaning there is no competition from inside Russia and no competition from outside Russia. The only time Russia actually needs to compete is when they sell their products to a foreign market.
Also, a big part of this is also because the way how the West portrayed Russia and the West purposely demonized Russia, because, and again, I'm going to use my country as an example of this. The reason why my country is rich is because, another reason I should say, is because of outside foreign investment. My country literally has a reputation of being a good, safe place for you to invest your stuff in, because the crime rate isn't like horrible, the country isn't a dictatorship or anything like that. I mean, just overall, the reputation there is just, everyone thinks of my country and they don't think bad. They think, oh, it's a great, safe place. And because of that, that has always, throughout the years, encouraged investors. Also, in it being the fact that we're the most British Caribbean island, and when most people imagine something British, they don't really think of something bad, unless you're talking colonialism. I'm talking like modern day, right? So because of that, you know, we've had a lot more investors and whatnot, and it helped the economy boost greatly. Yeah, Russia doesn't have that. Most people think of Russia, they say, oh, Russia bad. They think, oh, Russia commit war crime, or oh, Russia use meat wave tactics, or they just think Russia's bad. And because of and this is another reason why Africa is also poor, because when you imagine Africa, you don't realize that Africa is huge and that there's so many different countries. You just automatically think Africa is poor. And because of this scares away so many potential investors that could invest into Africa. And this is one of the reasons why Africa is so poor today. It's the same logic of Russia. But the difference is that purposeful propaganda has given Russia such a bad image that many people just don't want to invest into Russia. Really and truly. And that's why Russia is, the economy is as good as it can be. And also the tourism industry, something that he isn't pointing out, the tourism industry is a big factor in many countries' economies, because when you have people from other countries who are bringing their money from their country and spending it in your country, that greatly increases their economy. That's literally the main reason why Barbados, my country, is rich, because of tourism. Again, and why does Barbados have such a high tourism? Because it has a reputation of being the most British Caribbean island, and also, like I just said, it has a reputation of being a very safe calm country. That's what most people imagine. Most people don't imagine that for Russia. I literally was talking to my brother the other day, and he was talking about places that he wanted to visit, right? And I looked at him, and I said, "Oh, you should visit Russia." And guess what reaction he had? He looked at me, and he laughed. Okay, literally. He looked at me, and he laughed. Because most people, they think that Russia is a super, super bad country. They're brainwashed. So because of that, Russia's tourism industry isn't as good as it probably could be compared to Western countries. And with the whole fiasco going on, I mean, yeah, obviously, it's going to affect Russia's economy.
The only two Russian industries that have actually developed are a small high-tech weapons industry and the oil and gas industry, where Russia sells weapons and energy to other countries in order to prop up government.
And let me talk about the weapons industry. Fun fact, did you know that the United States sanctions any country that tries to buy weapons from Russia or China or literally any other country that isn't America or a Western, basically an American vassal state, I should say? Did you know that? That's why many of these countries just are essentially forced to buy weapons from basically only America. Did you know that? Yeah. Thus boosting the American economy. Did you know that? Don't you just love imperialism? I do.
Government finances. But this also causes a problem, because as machinery gets older, they will need replacement parts. The older the machine, the more likely it is that a company has moved on to produce new and more advanced machines. And so you can't buy replacement parts for old machines anymore, except for Russia, which was the only country still producing old Soviet technology. But as foreign companies moved on and stopped buying Russian equipment, some of those Russian factories might shut down because they no longer have enough customers. Those parts then become unavailable. This causes a chain reaction where various other Russian factories shut down as their machines break down. In order to keep its industry alive, the Russian government has to spend money keeping obsolete factories in business, thereby maintaining the old Soviet system of supporting inefficient companies. As a result, Russia's economy has become more and more closed off from the rest of the world, as it has to rely more and more on replacements produced inside Russia. And because a lot of Russian industries barely innovate, there were no customers to buy your newer machines, even if you did make them. And for those high-tech components the Russian industry does need, it had to buy them from other countries, such as high-tech computers. As a result, Russia is completely reliant on other countries for high-tech products, while their own products are becoming less and less valuable as they become more and more obsolete.
And guys, again, let's not forget, a lot of these Western countries, guys, the reason why they're rich is because they're getting intelligent people from these third world countries that they're exploiting, flocking to their country. Okay, let's not forget about that. Okay, keep that in mind.
This goes hand in hand with a Russian culture where people have to do as they are told and not speak up about issues. Meaning that, just like in the Soviet Union, a lot of managers had no idea how to fix the company because people were not allowed to tell them. In short, almost everything in Russia is geared towards keeping the people in power and not towards making a wealthier nation. Oligarchs don't fight to make new industries, they instead try to take over the industries that already exist in the country. And unless Russia fixes this problem, it will remain a country that sometimes develops for a couple of years or maybe even decades, but usually stagnates and declines. Even if somehow Russia got a president who actually cared about economic development, it would be almost impossible to implement, because such plans need money and most of the money is earned by the oligarchs. And if they decide to tax the oligarchs, then the president is likely replaced with someone else, someone who does not tax the oligarchs. And so in the end, after the breakup of the USSR, Russia saw a massive increase in inequality.
I mean, Russians don't really get taxed anyways. The tax rate in Russia is so low.
In many countries, this was a reason to improve the economy and lift the poor out of poverty. But in Russia, the poor have largely remained poor, and those who became rich early got to stay rich. For example, the people who were well...
This also depends on the region as well. Russia is a continental country, so you can't really just say Russians remain poor. Like, where? Every region is different. Like Moscow is completely different from freaking a Siberian region. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, people from Moscow make around like $10,000 a year, which is considered high income. So like, that's not really poor. If you're in America, you think that's poor, but it's not poor. America has a GDP of, I don't know, like $23 trillion or something. So yeah, that's poor for you because you have more money to go around. So if you're making only $10,000 when your country has a GDP of $22 trillion, yeah, that's bad. But when Russia has a GDP of $4 trillion, no, that's actually quite good. So I don't know.
Educated before the breakup generally got a good job after the breakup and could live relatively comfortable lives. And they largely chose to spend those comfortable lives in the richer regions of Russia, meaning that finding teachers to teach the poor is a lot more difficult because those teachers don't want to live there. And moving millions of students around in a country the size of Russia is incredibly expensive. Too expensive for the country to afford. As a result, the children of the rich will also get a good education, but the children of those who are not rich will likely remain poor, and those who are poor are unable to build up wealth over time, such as owning their own house, with a large percentage of Russians forced to rent for the rest of their lives, which will create generational poverty for decades to come.
Wow, and it's the
For
same
example,
thing in the US. Most people are renting in the US.
The Soviet Union collapsed, the currency lost most of its value.
Americans are basically paying off mortgages. It's like, it's not as black and white as you'd make it out to be. Americans can't even, I mean, my generation can't even freaking buy a house. That's impossible. So yeah, this is not a unique problem to Russia, but okay.
Russians lost 70 to 80% of their savings.
I genuinely cannot watch. I can't keep watching.
With inflation reaching 1,500% in 1992. Between 1989 and 2016, the average household income increased by 40% despite rising inequality. This inequality was so big that by 2016, the top 5% owned 85% of the wealth in Russia, compared to 63% in China and 66% in the USA. And Russia's
BS. 1% of the population owns 80% of the wealth in the United States. BS. And also it's 60% of the wealth that goes to the rich oligarchs. Okay, so
level of income inequality.
Are they talking about GDP or I feel like I'm misinterpreting. I don't know where the heck he got these stats from, but you can literally go Google this right now.
Is higher than almost all other post-communist states. And then Russia did something really, really, really stupid. It decided to start a full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Oh my god, not this. Yes, you mean the invasion that was forced, that, you know, Russia literally tried so hard to avoid, you know, but it was literally forced, and it isn't even a full-scale invasion. It's actually quite limited. Yeah, you mean the regions that Russia literally just annexed that is worth over $12 trillion in mineral and wealth? You mean that? Yeah. Go talk about how Russia now controls that, because it does. Give it like 20 years when Russia develops those regions. It'll greatly boost the Russian economy. So I'm not sure how this is. Let's play devil's advocate and say, okay, yeah, it was dumb. I'm not sure why that's stupid, considering that now Russia controls all of that.
Europeans opened a history book and learned that, oh my god, Russia has been trying to invade Europe since it was created almost 500 years ago.
Oh my god, he did not just say that. He did not just say, holy No.
Allies began to close themselves off from the Russian economy. As a result, Russia started suffering shortages of high-tech products, airplane parts, machinery, and
Wow, it's not like Europe has been going to war with each other since the dawn of man.
even military components. Even if Russia manages to find new suppliers, it will cost a lot of money to transition the Russian economy from relying on Western products towards relying on Chinese products or perhaps Indian products.
You know what's hilarious about this is that the West is still trading with Russia despite the quote-unquote sanctions. The West needs Russia so bad that they're indirectly still trading with them. You could go look this up. It's ridiculous.
In the coming decades. And even if it manages
So no, Russia is not as closed off as he's making this. This is so
recover from
stupid.
the war, it will still be suffering from a lack of competition and a lack of innovation.
Yeah,
And
no,
Russia
I disagree. I disagree, actually. I think Russia is actually going to benefit from the new lands that they retook from Ukraine, because before this cursed Soviet Union came, those lands were actually Russian lands. Mariupol, Sevastopol, Odessa, all of these lands were a part of Nova Russia. Well, I should say Nova Russia, whatever the heck grammatically. But the point is, they were all part of New Russia. I mean, the cities, they were built by Russia. Okay, so it's like, oh no, how dare Russia takes back, land that it built its cities on, that the Soviet Union. I can't. I'm losing to his brain cells. I can't.
a completely new economic system, it won't ever become a rich country. But that is unlikely to happen within
It is a rich country. It's literally high income. You can go
lifetimes anyway. And so this is why Russia is not a rich country today. If you like this video, then click the like button.
Yo, I wonder how much money the CIA or whoever the heck paid this guy. I don't know. There's absolutely no way this guy unironically made this video. And of course, it got 500,000 views. The like to dislike ratio isn't really bad because most people are brainwashed by the West propaganda. And I think that Russia is a super duper evil country. Oh boy, I can't wait to see how many subscribers are going to lose from this video. Alright, look, you made it all the way to the end of this video, man. Make sure you go subscribe. If you have any suggestions for me, go comment down below. Eventually, I will do it. This is just one of those videos that I just wanted to drop my reaction to because I've been meaning to do this. Anyways, man, thank you for watching, man, and goodbye. Make sure to like the video, please, because I'm pretty sure my like to dislike ratio is going to be horrendous.